Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mathilde. I'm the Digital Marketing Analyst at Amity, and I'm super excited to have all of you join us today for our webinar with Kristen Hayer. So Kristen is the founder and CEO of the Success League, and today she's prepared an awesome presentation for us about personalizing one-to-many customer success. Really good stuff, and Kristen is an amazing presenter. She knows so much about customer success in general, and we actually did a few webinars with her before. So we covered topics like compensation plans, customer success metrics and goals, and customer success leadership skills. So if you missed it and you want to see a recording, we have a link, so just send me a note in the chat of your Zoom control panel, and I'll send you a link after the webinar, because those are awesome, and I love to share everything that Kristen shares with us. But so today we are covering personalizing one-to-many customer success, and before we get started into the topic, I just have a few of housekeeping notes to share with everyone. We will be on Twitter, so use the hashtag CSWebinar to share your thoughts, share screenshots, and tag us at GetAmity at Kristen Hayer, and we would love to retweet you and engage with you. As usual, we are doing a Q&A at the end, so we have some time set aside with Kristen to ask her all of your questions about this topic. In your Zoom control panel, you have a chat box, but you also have a dedicated Q&A box, which you can use to send us your questions. Don't wait until the end, just send them as they come, and we'll try to answer as many as possible before the end of the session today. And of course, we are recording the session today, and we will be sharing the recording as well as the deck. So expect to see an email from me before the weekend with all the links, and don't hesitate to share with your team or anyone that you know in customer success who would benefit from that. And I'm just going to take a short minute to introduce Amity to everyone joining us today. If anyone is joining our webinar series today for the first time, Amity is a customer success management platform, and the software allows CSMs to retain and grow customers by doing a lot of things, from monitoring health scores, engagements, and even automated one-to-many engagements and playbooks, so like emails, tasks, and team collaboration tasks as well. And we integrate with a lot of systems out there, so we integrate with marketing automation, support CRM, things like that. But I don't want to spend too much time on this, so just head over to our website after the webinar if you want more information, or send me a note, and we'd love to tell you more. But that's it for Amity and for me, and without further ado, I really want to introduce Kristen, and thank you, Kristen, so much for taking the time today, and I'm super excited.
Thanks, Mathilde. Hi, everybody. My name is Kristen Hayer. I'm the founder and CEO of the Success League, and today we're going to be talking about how to personalize a one-to-many customer success approach. Just to give you a little bit of background on that, a one-to-many customer success approach from my perspective is any time where you have more than 200 customers per CS staff person. And so that's really kind of the foundation of what we're going to be talking about today. What I'm going to focus on is how do you execute a plan like that, or how do you transition from a high-touch customer success model to a tech touch or one-to-many customer success model, which is what a lot of organizations are doing right now. So what we're going to be covering today is really how to design your program. We're going to talk through some communication options that are available to you if you are trying to design a one-to-many program, and we're going to talk about what you can use beyond just email, which is sort of the first thing everybody thinks about. We're going to talk about how you can personalize that automation to make sure that it has the feel that you want it to have, and it is engaging to customers as talking to a person. We're going to talk a little bit about who should run a program like this within your organization, and hint, it probably shouldn't be a CSM. So if you're a customer success leader, you might be interested to hear what I think you should do in that case. And then we're going to talk about testing a little bit and some technology options. So with that, I'm going to just introduce myself a little bit further. So why should you listen to me on this topic? So I have been designing and building sales and marketing and customer success programs for over 20 years. I've done that in a lot of different organizations. Specific to one-to-many or tech touch programs, when I was the vice president of customer success for Jazz HR, I built both of those kinds of programs and ran them both out of our customer success function within Jazz. And so that was a great experience personally. And then as the leader of the Success League, we work with companies on all different kinds of programs. So high touch, low touch, tech touch programs, often all three within the same company. That's pretty typical. And so that's really where I'm coming from in terms of experience on this particular topic. If you've listened to my webinars in the past, you know that I also like to dive into a little bit about what's going on with me and my family. So I have a husband and daughter and dog, and we live in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And so things that have happened since the last webinar, I had my 25th wedding anniversary. So you can see a picture of my husband and I here when we were children, basically, and got married in our early 20s. And then the next picture is of the two of us today. So a lot has changed, particularly our weight, I would say, of all the things. You can see in the middle my ballet class. I take ballet once a week with my mom, who is the person behind me with the bob. And she is 71 years old and takes ballet every week. So she's kind of a rock star. And then my daughter, who I've shown you in the past, is kind of interested in acting and modeling. This is a terrific picture of her at our local community event entering a pie eating contest. She did not win. She actually did pretty well. Her best friend entered with her and managed to not get her face dirty at all. Her best friend delicately picked all the chocolate chips off of the chocolate chip pie. And then the last picture is our puppy, who, if you listened to my last webinar, you probably saw a picture of the puppy as a tiny little puppy that's about the size of a loaf of bread. Now the puppy is 7 months old, and this is her a few weeks ago. This is her favorite spot. She likes to sit at our bistro table in our backyard and look like she's waiting for someone to come serve her some food. So that's what's been going on with me. We've had a great summer. Please keep the Bay Area in your thoughts right now, because we have some huge fires, as you may have heard, happening north of the city. And so there's a lot of people that have been displaced. So if you get a chance and you can help the people in that area, please do so. There's a lot of people that are out of their homes right now. So let's get into our topic. We're going to talk about designing your one-to-many program. So this is the steps that I recommend going through. If you haven't already done it, a lot of people have done this and kind of started doing this for their high-touch programs, but you want to map your customer journey. The way that works, and I'm going to show you an example in a minute, is you really want to think through the stages of your customer's life cycle once a sale happens, and sometimes even prior to the sale being closed. Often, if you've mapped that already with people, it's easy to then transition that into what do you do from an automation standpoint. So if you've looked at all your touch points, you can then identify key content that you need to communicate at each touch point. From there, you can select the appropriate communication tool to use. I'm going to recommend that you use a variety of different tools to communicate with your clients, so don't just get reliant on email. You want to then design some messaging that incorporates that content and build your layouts for whatever it is you're using. Build the automation itself. So what's going to trigger those messages? Is it going to be activity within your app? Is it going to be time since they've closed as a customer? Is it going to be triggers that happen? So maybe some of the messaging might be triggered by behavior. Some of the messaging might be triggered by timing. You want to think about all of that and figure out how you're going to automate that. Then you're going to test for results and get feedback. And from there, you're going to continue to iterate. So this is a process that you'll actually go through a number of times as you build your program. And so you want to make sure that you go step by step through this. One thing I will say is that people get very overwhelmed easily when they start thinking about a one-to-many customer success program, because they start thinking about all the possible things that they could automate and all the possible touch points that you could have with your customers. And while you do want to keep that big picture in mind, and I think that's really step one here, is think about what you want that total customer journey to look like. I think it's important to not try to eat the elephant all at once. So you want to make sure that you think about what you can automate using the tools you have right now. Go ahead and put those things into place, then buy more tools, then automate some more stuff. Don't feel like you have to automate every touch point right away. If you don't have a customer success program going yet, and you're trying to build a tech touch program, even a few touch points are going to make a big difference for your customer experience. So start small and build up. And then as you get your whole program built, that's when you want to really focus on testing and iteration. So you want to think about, if you're starting from a high touch journey, so maybe you're a startup company who, it's pretty natural to start customer success with people. And so if you're in that situation, or if you've had a high touch customer success program going for a while, and you want to, you need to, from a cost perspective or a scalability perspective, really trim the program down into a tech touch type of program. You can start from your high touch customer journey and then think about how to translate those human touch points into automation. So I'm going to share an example with you. So this is a very simple customer journey. You can think about life cycle stages in terms of the columns. So what do you need to do when a new customer comes on board? What do you do during your onboarding process? What else happens during those first 90 days? What's happening from a maintenance and support perspective until you come up to your renewal period? And then what happens around renewals or cancellations? So this is a very simple life cycle. You don't have to have a very complicated one, but most organizations have a few more categories here. So you want to think through those stages. Then you want to build out touch points. You can see I've got a number of touch points fleshed out here. So instead of a human quarterly business review, you can see we've got a quarterly customer survey going out. That's a low touch way to accomplish some of the things that a quarterly business review might accomplish. There's onboarding emails. Instead of having a person place the call or create an email from scratch and send it to the customer, you may want to build out a series of onboarding emails that communicate that same information, but in an automated way. So it's easy to start from a customer program that's high touch, and then look for all the ways that you could possibly automate that. In a perfect automated model or one-to-many model, there's no human touch points in here. This is totally automated. It can still feel personal. It can still be fun and funny. It just needs to be automated. So lastly, you want to look for results that can be reproduced across channels. So if you are getting great results on something like an onboarding email, even if you have a tech touch program, you might also have a high touch model for some of your bigger customers. If you're getting great results from the tech touch model, you can leverage that information and that touch point in your high touch model as well. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes, but be thinking about how you can reproduce great results across all of your programs that you have going. So keep that in mind as well. So this is an example. Don't feel like you have to write all of this down, because I'm actually going to leave this slide right now. You will get a copy of this with your slide deck for the presentation, so you'll have this to refer to. This is a very simplified customer journey. You'll see onboarding emails, not onboarding email. There's probably 5 to 10 emails that would need to go out as a part of that process. You'll see triggered emails that also could be triggered by any number of different things. So consider that this is just a very basic version of what you would probably end up up with. Most organizations, when they do a one-to-many program, have between 40 and 50 touch points altogether. So you really want to think about these in terms of how you could expand on this. All right, from there, let's talk about your communication options. So everyone thinks of email. That's the first one up here. That's great if you want to have a personalized message that looks like it's coming from a human. And it could be coming from the person who runs the program. It's also great for announcements if you want to announce something exciting that's coming from maybe your CEO or something that's coming from your head of product. So email is great for those things. Some other options are webinars. I think webinars are really great for training, just like we're doing today. New features. So if you've got to educate a large group of customers on a new feature that you've released, rather than having a CSM call each one of their customers and go through it individually, you can do a webinar and have a whole bunch of people come to listen to one presentation. Also, you can do Q&A. So at the end of a webinar, you can open it up and have people ask questions. That gets a lot of people's questions answered, because if one person has the question, probably a lot of people that are listening to your webinar also have that same question. That's really what we're going to be doing at the end of today's presentation as well. So it's a great way to get answers out to a lot of people all at once. Videos are awesome for micro training. You don't want to have huge, long training videos typically. You want to have any training that you need to do or walkthroughs cut down into short little videos. People like to learn in small bursts. So videos are great for that. Sharing customer stories with your client base is great through video. People really relate to other people talking about the product. So that's a good use of video as well. Podcasts. I have a podcast. I love podcasts as a possibility for communicating to a lot of people. I think it's a great way to communicate tips and best practices. You can also do that through video casting as well, especially if there's a lot of visual that you need to communicate. But podcasts are also a great way to do customer interviews as well. And people are sometimes more comfortable being on a podcast than on a video, because they don't have to worry about how they look. They just have to worry about how they sound. So keep that in mind as an alternative to videos if you're having a hard time getting your customers to do customer stories on video. In-app messaging. So this is things like walkthroughs or context-specific help. Product releases you can announce through in-app messaging. So anytime you want the customer to be getting the message while they're running into the problem they might be running into, in-app messaging is great for that. So you can think about that as an option. Having a customer forum. If you've got a big enough customer base, this can be a really good place to think about communicating with your clients. It's a great way to leverage your super users. So if you have a bunch of customers who are really great at using your product and really into talking to other people about it, you can put them in charge of managing the content that goes there, so it keeps you from having to do all of it. You do need to have someone monitoring it, so it's important for you to have someone assigned to it, but it's a great one-to-many tactic. Social media can be a really great place to communicate with your clients and keep people engaged. I think social media is wonderful for talking about customer events or engaging people with the company, getting people to events, and really sharing your company culture with your customers. And then finally, surveys. So surveys are terrific for gathering feedback. So if you're trying to replace a touch point with a customer where a lot of the purpose for that touch point is gathering information from your customers, surveys can replace that human touch point. It's a great way to collect product feedback. It's good for refining your content. So if you have a piece of content you're not sure about, you can survey around that and really learn what your customers are looking for at that place. And then also good for evaluating your program overall. So don't stick to just email. Think about all of the things that you could be doing to reach out to your customers. It will make them happier because they won't have email inboxes full of emails from you all the time. And also, it gets them the right content in the right way at the right time. And really, that's what customer success is all about in terms of a one-to-many program. So let's talk about how you can personalize this. As I just mentioned, personalization is really about anticipating the needs of customers, and that's what customer success is really all about from either a personal standpoint or from an automation standpoint. You want to match the content that you're putting out there to typical needs at each stage in the company customer journey. Obviously, you can't tailor it in the way that you can when you have a high-touch program, but if you have enough customers that you've justified having a one-to-many program, you probably know some trends about what your customers are looking for at different times. You can use your support tickets to help inform that. You can use your high-touch program to help inform that. You really want to think about what people are running into at different stages in their life cycle and try to anticipate their needs. You can personalize the messages. People like to see and hear their names. This is there's been tons of studies done on this, so if you really need justification for that, you can go look up those studies. But you want to use people's names whenever possible. So if you're using a CRM tool or you're using a CS platform, those enable you to be able to really personalize the communication that's going out. You also want to humanize the communication, and what I mean by that is you want to have the messages that are going out come from people, not machines. So if you're sending out an email, it should come from a person in your company. Now that person might be a CSM, or that person might be the person that's running the automated program, or it might be look like it's coming from the VP of customer success, whatever you think makes the most sense for that piece of communication, but it should look like it's coming from a person. I'd say the only exception to this is really if you've got some in-app messaging going where it's really more of a walkthrough or something like that. But I think to humanize as much as you can of your messaging is really important, so have it come from individuals. And then make it fun. You know, I think a great example of this is Slack. When you log into Slack, you get a funny, weird little message every morning, and it's, hey, your hair looks great today, or something stupid. You know, it's coming from a machine. You know, it's not a person, but it's funny and it's fun, and it makes the experience better. So you can't hide the fact that you're automating, but you can have a good time with it, and you can be witty, and you can make sure that the messaging supports your brand and is aligned with what you're presenting from a culture standpoint to your customers. So put some thought into what and how you communicate and how you can extend your brand through the customer lifecycle. I think some collaboration with marketing is really good to do here so that you get some consistency. That way, when a customer talks to your organization through the marketing channels, through the sales process, and then through the customer success process post-sale, it's a very unified experience for the client. So how can you and when should you personalize the automation? Some triggers that you should be thinking about, you know, again, I'll go back to what I said in the last slide. Making sure people get the right content at the right time is the first rule for how you personalize it. The main thing people are going to remember is that you got to them with the right content at the right time, right when they needed it. So some triggers that you might want to think about are churn risk factors and also opportunity indicators. So churn risk factors on the negative side, opportunity indicators on the positive side. So some common churn risk factors, and of course every company is going to have different ones, but these are some to think about. Negative feedback, that's kind of an obvious one. Declining usage, so if you see customer usage decline outside of a normal usage pattern, that can be a churn risk factor. Unmet feature requests, so if you've got feature requests that are hanging out there for a really long time, whatever you define really long as, you know, you may want to consider that a churn risk factor. Company changes on the customer side, and that could be positive or negative company changes. They could get sold, they could go out of business, those are negative changes. They could get around to funding, and sometimes even though that's a really positive change for your customer, that may trigger them to start looking at alternatives to your solution. So even though it's positive for them, it may not be positive for you. So think about that if that has an impact on your business and the risk level. Future pricing requests. So if you've got somebody who calls in and says, hey, what's your pricing going to look like in 2018? that might be a signal that they're giving you that they're looking around. Requesting a copy of your contract, that's also a common signal that somebody's looking around or considering leaving you. And if your main contact goes dark, they just aren't calling you back, they're not connecting with you for a period of time. All of these things could be triggers on the negative side. Some things on the opportunity side, so these are things that might indicate that somebody is ready to upgrade or ready to buy something new. So if a customer is using your solution really heavily, maybe they're using it to the maximum of whatever plan they're on, that may indicate that they're ready to upgrade. If they aren't using certain features of your solution that are paid features, you may want to think about introducing them to those features. So that might be an opportunity as well. Again, company changes. So if they get around to funding, they may be open to buying more of your solution or using it across more of their organization. So that might be an opportunity. Any new initiatives that they have going on, any new contacts that come into their organization, those are opportunities too. Marketing campaign responses. So if you've been running a marketing campaign marketing campaigns are great for one-to-many programs because they're a great way to get information out to your customer base on new things that you're offering. If somebody responds to that, if they open the email, if they click on the email, that's a good indicator that they might be interested in what you have to offer. So, coordinate very closely with your marketing team if they're running those kinds of informational campaigns to your customer base. And then finally, new product or service offerings, if you have those, and that's a chance for you to go out and talk to customers about what they're doing right now and also what you could maybe do for them in the future. So these are just a few potential triggers. These are common ones. So a lot of you probably have many of these. I think you want to think outside of just this list and think about other things that might trigger a risk in your organization or might indicate that an opportunity is there for you to grow with that customer. You need to look at this in terms of not just individuals, but trends across your customer base if you're running a one-to-many program, and have campaigns then that go out to try to drive the behavior you want. So think of these just as triggers, not as a reason why some human should call this customer. So make sure you've automated whatever's going to happen behind these triggers. Okay, so let's talk about who runs this program. As you can probably tell, this is a very technology and marketing heavy program. So this is not typically the skill set of a CSM. This is really more of the skill set of an analyst. So what you're looking for is a program manager, somebody who has knowledge of your solution so they can figure out how to weave that into the communications. You want somebody who understands customer behavior. So you want somebody who's had some of that marketing training around customer behavior and how to drive behavior. You want someone who understands your CRM, your marketing and communication tools that you have in place. So if you've got Salesforce and you've got Amity and you've got MailChimp, let's say, someone who knows how all of those things can work together to create this kind of a program. You need someone who's good at analytics and testing, so someone who can look at data and say, I don't like that click-through rate. Let's try testing 2 different subject lines and we see if we can drive more engagement with this particular touch point. You want someone who's really curious. And then finally, you need somebody who's good at writing and communication. So this role in a company who's doing a full one-to-many program often looks like a hybrid of sort of a CSM and a marketing analyst. So you do need someone who's got a vision for how the customer engages with your company, but you also need a lot of analytical skills that often CSMs don't have. So if you have an analytical CSM on your team, they may be a good fit. Or if you have a customer-focused marketer, they also might be a good fit. So if you're trying to find the right person on your existing team, that's what you want to be looking for. They can both thrive in the role. Often, however, companies are having to go outside of their existing team and look for people who have program management background in these kinds of low-touch automated programs. In working on this for Jazz HR, where I worked before, we ended up hiring somebody who had experience running free trial programs in the past, and that was a good fit for us for this one-to-many program. So something to think about as well. That leads into testing. So in order for you to run a program like this and have it be very effective in the long run, because your company is always changing and your product offerings are always changing and your customer base is changing, you need to be continually testing and improving your program. So the kinds of things that you want to take a look at when you're testing are, if you're running emails and surveys, you want to look at opens and clicks. So opens, people opening your emails and people clicking on the action items inside your emails. You want to test subject lines. Sometimes all you have to change is a subject line, and it completely changes how effective that piece of communication is for your customer base. So make sure that you're testing that. You want to test the calls to action inside of those pieces of communication and make sure that the call to action is working well. You may want to change that. With emails and surveys, tiny little changes can make a huge difference in the results you're getting. And so you want somebody who's running this program to really make sure that they're paying attention to all those little details. And then finally, the content. You may just not have the content dialed in for the position in the customer's life cycle. So you want to be thinking about, where do you put content? And if you've tested opens and clicks, subject lines, calls to action, and you're still not getting great results, try changing up the content itself and see if that makes a difference. For webinars, podcasts, and videos, you want to be thinking about your format. So all of these things can come in different formats. Podcasts are a great example. So you could have podcasts that are very focused on tips and tricks. You could have a podcast that's very focused on reviewing key concepts with your customers. You could have a podcast that is interviews with your clients. So, the format, different formats may be more or less successful with your customer base. So you want to be testing that. Again, you want to think about content and also timing. All of these things can either be long or short. And if you're not having great results with a long format podcast, try a short format podcast. Or if your videos are really short but they're not getting great engagement, try running them for a little bit longer or covering more ground in your videos and see what happens. So think about timing as well. In-app messaging, what you want to be looking for there is engagement. How often are people going through those walkthroughs? How often are people looking at the messaging you have in there? You also want to pay attention to use patterns, especially with walkthroughs. Those can be more or less successful depending on how thorough they are. So pay attention to that. Most of those tools that allow you to easily set up walkthroughs in your app have good analytics that you can use to determine whether it's working well or not. And then again, look at the content. And finally, for your customer forum or social media, you want to look at things like super user engagement. Are your super users actually getting into the forum or actually engaging with you on social media, or is it not interesting enough for them? Do you maybe need to change up the topics? And you also, of course, want to look at likes and shares, although don't get too hung up on that, especially at first. It takes a while to build up a social media presence. So if you don't treat it like your Facebook page, you may not quite have the same level of engagement right away. As far as how to test, A/B split testing works well for things like emails or surveys or in-app messaging. Some of this stuff, you just have to try it out and measure it and see how it goes, and then try something different if it's not working. It's important to, as you're doing this, keep track of what works and what doesn't work, so you have a historical record, because you're going to be running this program for a long time. And at some point you may have a different program manager. You need to have the data on what you've tried in the past so that you don't repeat mistakes that you've made before. So make sure you're keeping a good record of what you're doing. So along with testing, I think one thing that's really important, and I mentioned this earlier in the webinar, is that if you are running both a high-touch program and a low-touch program or tech-touch program in different segments of your customer base, which is pretty common, I think those two programs can really inform each other. And that's a really nice positive feedback loop that you can create. You need to be conscientious about it when you're building your tech-touch program. So from the high touch programs, what you can take away as a designer or a program manager for your one-to-many program is the content that customers want at various life cycle stages. You can actually get that from your CSMs that are running your high touch program. Talk to them. Ask them what they're hearing from customers at different stages of the life cycle. Ask them about what people are looking for. And you can also get the reaction to any new products or services that you've put out from those same CSMs. They can tell you really quickly what are their customers saying, where are their customers running into problems, and you can use that to create the automation that you need in your one-to-many program. For high-touch programs, what you can give back to those high-touch programs is some automation support. So if you're testing messaging and your messaging is working really well, maybe you can actually replace a human touch point with some automation and free up those CSMs so that they can focus on more strategic conversations with customers rather than doing administrative pieces of their role. So think about how you can automate some of the high touch program as well. And then think about what topics CSMs should discuss with their customers so you can feed them back topics too. So if you have a email that goes out during onboarding, say, and that email is getting a ton of engagement, you should make sure that your CSMs, when they're doing a high touch engagement, are talking about that same topic with those customers as well at that same stage. So you want to make sure that you're feeding each other good information about what's working for your clients. So build a positive feedback loop. I have found that a once a quarter meeting is probably a good cadence for getting a team together to talk about these things and to feed each other information about what's working and not working. You can also do that around any major product releases that are happening for your team too. Let's talk quickly about technology options. I recommend starting with tools you already have. So most people have some sort of CRM system, and most people in their marketing department have some sort of email automation tool. Common CRM tools are listed up here. Email marketing tools are listed up here. There's a lot of them, so there's more than what I have listed here. These are just some common ones. So if that's what you have, start with that. Automate as much as you can using the tools you've got, and then think about adding additional tools on. Don't just go buy a whole bunch of stuff and then work on automating all of it. Start with what you have and then grow your program from there. You want to probably quickly, if you're doing a one-to-many program, have a customer success platform in place. One of the nice things about Amity is they actually have an email marketing component built in. So instead of having to have a separate CS platform and email marketing platform, you actually have that all together if you have Amity, so that's kind of cool. You want to think about analytics tools, so Google Analytics, Mixpanel, Pendo, those are tools you can use to kind of look at customer behavior inside of your app. Support solutions like Zendesk, Jira, Intercom, Freshdesk, those can all set off triggers if people are logging a bunch of tickets, so you can use that to inform some of your automation. And then finally, there's a ton of survey tools out there. Wootrix is pretty cool because they're set up for NPS and they are embedded in your solution, so that's kind of neat. There's a whole bunch of other ones too, though, that you can use. And so think about your tools, be conscientious of what you're purchasing. I would say a best practice approach for that is automate with what you have, buy one new tool, build that out and automate with that, then buy another tool, then build that out and automate with that. So don't just go buy everything at once and try to do it all at the same time. So take on one new tool at a time. And make sure that you've maximized what you've got before you buy new stuff. So those are some technology options for you. And with that, I'm going to open it up for Q&A. We've got about 20 minutes. And so I guess, Matilda, do we have questions from the audience at this point?
Yeah, we do already have a couple of questions, but I would definitely recommend that everyone send us questions in the Q&A box of your Zoom webinar panel, but we can already get started with the questions we got during the presentation. So Kimberly is asking, can you speak of at all to a large enterprise model as opposed to a simple model and how that might be different?
Yes, so I gave you a really simple example of a customer journey, and in a large enterprise, I think that your journey looks a lot more complex and probably is broken down by segments and is probably also broken down to some degree by products that the customers have. So it becomes more of a matrix. And you may have a different automated journey for each customer segment that falls into your one-to-many program. You may have a different path for different products. So it can get, in a large enterprise, when you're trying to cover a lot of ground and a lot of different kinds of customers, it can become a very complex process. This is why a program manager, especially in a large enterprise, is really important. And it may, in a very large enterprise, be a team of people who does this. In a large organization, while this may come under a chief customer officer, it's often not considered part of the customer success team. It's a separate team that handles it. So that's what I see when I'm working with larger companies. I do think that it's important to start simple and to always keep in mind that what you're really trying to do with this, whether you're working in a large enterprise or working with a smaller company, is you're really trying to match the response to the customer behavior. So always bring it back to customer behavior. Don't let your program get too big and complicated just because you're a big organization. You have a lot of product offerings. You always want to make sure you're matching to customer behavior. So, customers are fairly simple. We're all humans, so you don't want to let it grow too big. So that's my one caution in an enterprise environment. I hope that answered your question.
Awesome, thank you. Another question here around automated emails and subject lines in particular.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations around subject lines? Because, of course, you don't want it to sound like a marketing email. And that was from Cooper.
Yeah. Um, I sort of have my own personal opinions, and this is from my experience with what has worked in the organizations I've worked for and also what works for the Success League. I personally like to put the name of the company in the subject line and then put a colon and then write what the email is about, because your customer is dealing with a lot of email, regardless of who they are. And so if you're trying to communicate with them about a tool that they have purchased from you and you're their customer success connection, the email really needs to indicate who it's coming from, and not that will help keep it from looking too markety. Also, you want to avoid a lot of things like all caps, smiley faces, or emojis in your subject lines. You want to avoid a ton of exclamation points. Those are things that sort of set off spam filters, and you don't want your important emails getting caught in people's spam filters. So that's a good best practice too. Just be very clear and direct about what it is you're communicating. You can still have fun with it. I think being too witty sometimes comes across, in a subject line anyway, sometimes comes across as being salesy or marketing-ish. So maybe avoid that and just be more direct.
Awesome. Thanks. A two-part question here.
Sure.
First, what's the best way to keep track of your touch points and the tests that you're running to see which ones work best? And then building on that, is it better to test touch points one at a time, or to build out the skeleton of the whole journey and put people through the whole thing to understand whether it works or not?
So I think the first thing you want to do is you want to build the whole customer journey and automate as much as you can before you go too deep into testing. If there's an obvious problem, like nobody's opening one of your emails, or one of your videos is just not getting a lot of views and it's failing, fix that, the sort of very clear-cut cases. And then once you have all of those pieces in place, that's when you really want to get into testing. And so the way I like to keep track of it is I actually have every touch point outlined on a spreadsheet, kind of like, what you saw, only in a much, obviously, more expanded format, because you can't fit all of it on to a very small slide deck. But think about it in terms of having a map. There's a lot of tools besides just spreadsheets you can use for mapping. There's a really nice tool called Mural that you could use to have a more visual way of presenting that and keeping track of it. But I think just have some tool that lets you build out the whole journey. If you know you want a touch point and you don't have the tools to build it yet, you can kind of put a placeholder in there for it. And then when you're testing, when you really have gotten to the point where you're testing, test one thing at a time, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to test a variable like a subject line, and if there's other tests going on at the same time, it can throw off your results. So you do want to try to test one thing at a time. Prioritize. So pick the thing that is most important, test that first, or the thing that you're getting the worst response on, and then go on and test something else. These tests don't have to be necessarily really super long. You really just want to kind of get initial impressions. As your program matures, you can start running longer tests, but you really want to kind of get it dialed in kind of at a high level first, and then really focus on those micro adjustments later on. I hope that answers your question.
Awesome, thank you. So another question related to this. What are the metrics that you're looking on to measure the automated programs in the short run?
Really, in the short run, you want to be looking for engagement. So where are people engaging with your pieces of content? In the long run, obviously, you want this program to drive your key metrics. So you want it driving lower churn. You want it driving better NPS. You want it driving expansion revenue. So whatever your key metrics are, that's what this program should drive in the long run. Obviously, those numbers aren't going to change in the short term. So in the short term, as a proxy for that, what you want to use is touch point engagement, and really looking at those pieces of engagement and where are people engaging and where are people not engaging, and what kind of feedback are you getting from customers. So that's your short-term measure. You, of course, always, I've done a previous webinar, so if you want to really get into metrics and you're curious what I think about that, I've done another webinar with Amity that gets really deep into metrics, so you can go look that one up. And those are the longer term metrics. So whatever those high level metrics are, ultimately that's what this program should be driving.
Awesome. Another question here from Hannah is, do you have any recommendations around NPS and how to make the NPS survey more than just a number? Something that really measures the customer's likelihood to recommend your product to others.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what you mean by NPS. People throw that around a lot. Some people mean the actual NPS, Net Promoter Score, survey, which is a one-question 0 to 10 score survey. I feel that most NPS programs are executed very poorly and don't provide a lot of great information for you as a manager in terms of what you can actually do to dial in your program. So I think one way that you can make NPS more than just a number is to actually apply it at different touch points in your customer life cycle. So you can be measuring individual touch points instead of just measuring overall how likely is a customer to recommend you. Because I have to say, someone could throw 10 on that survey and the next day turn around and mention your competitor to a friend of theirs. So, that is a great metric if it's executed at touch points. It's less indicative of how happy a customer is if it's just sent to them randomly, because they could be having a very bad day and they could give you a really low score, or they could be having a fantastic day or just not paying attention and they could give you a really high score. It does not correlate very well to how likely somebody is to actually recommend you to their customers. I think if you really want to look at that specifically, what you can do is you can actually engage customers in a referral program and have them actually refer people to you, and then start to see how many people actually really do that, because that's where the rubber hits the road. Are they actually referring people to you? If they are, then they really are happy. So that's how I look at that. I could go on and on and on about NPS, so I'll leave it there.
Awesome, thank you. Another question here is the one-to-many model that we discussed today, is it better for B2B or B2C? And are there any differences there?
I would say it's a natural for B2C, because obviously if you have a B2C organization, you have to reach a lot of people with minimal resources, and that's kind of the nature of B2C. So you see companies who do an excellent job of one-to-many communication out there. Those are the brands we all love, right? So I'll use an example that I often use when I'm teaching a class on this, and it's Target. Target is one of my favorite brands. It's a great store, and they have figured me out. Every time I walk into a Target store, there is stuff positioned where they know I'm going to see it. And I always walk out of Target with about $50 to $100 more stuff than I went in there to buy. So I think that that's a great example of B2C using data and information to effectively market to me. So they figured me out from a opportunity standpoint. There's very little that would be a risk of me not going to Target anymore, other than them failing to provide me with cool stuff that I want for my home. So that's an example of B2C. B2B, there's a lot more variation. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. It also depends a lot on your business model and what you can afford. So some companies would really love to have a high touch model, but they can't afford it because their product is inexpensive, and the money that's coming in doesn't support the idea of a personal touch to every single customer. On the other hand, there are companies where a low touch model just won't work because their brand is all about high touch, and their marketing materials, and maybe they're a market leader, and maybe their customers are really huge and paying them a lot of money. Those companies can't afford to have a one-to-many model because they need to support their brand by having that high touch piece in place. So I see a lot more variation in terms of B2B models, and I think it really depends on your annual recurring revenue per customer, and I think it depends on your market presence. I think it depends on your brand promise. And so you want to think about all of those things as you're thinking about the model that works right for your business. And I would say most B2B companies have multiple models going at the same time.
Awesome. We have a few other awesome questions coming in right now. So do you have any tips for transitioning a high-touch customer base to a tech-touch model, and especially legacy customers who will be impacted by the switch?
Yeah, that's tough, and you want to be careful about that, especially if your legacy customers are, high annual recurring revenue, and you don't want to lose them. You can start by automating the more administrative touch points. So, if there needs to be an announcement that goes out about a new product feature, that can be automated. You want to webinars and videos that still feel very personal, still show a human touch, but are easier to implement from a one-to-many standpoint. And you want to ease those legacy customers in by doing that first. And then as they get used to that, you can start pulling more and more of the customer success human touch away and really start to kind of get them fully transitioned. It probably will take a year or two to get those customers transitioned in a way that's really graceful. Hopefully you have that amount of time. I think this was from Jackson. Jackson, hopefully you have that amount of time because it does take a little while.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that. Another question here from Frederick is, what are characteristics of clients where you would recommend not to use a one-to-many onboarding?
Oh, characteristics of when not to use one-to-many, is that the question?
Yeah, exactly. Of clients where you wouldn't want to use that.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, I think. If you have a customer with a high annual recurring revenue, they've maybe paid you a lot for your solution. If your onboarding process or your implementation process is very complex, you may just not be able to make it a one-to-many. You know, if there's a lot of manual pieces to it, you may have to have a higher touch program happening at that early stage of the customer's life. If you've got a brand promise that promises a lot of handholding and high touch, if you're sort of pitching your company as this very high touch, elite kind of offering, that doesn't match very well with an automated program. So, you know, think about your brand promise as well. You want to think about what, you know, you do have to think about what you can afford though. And that's really where one-to-many programs come in a lot, is not everybody can afford to have every single customer of theirs matched up to a CSM. So if you can't afford it, you need to think about ways where you can weave in automation at the very least, if not automating everything. So if you're in a situation where your implementation or your onboarding process is very complex and you can't really afford a high-touch customer success model, you need to be talking to your product team about how you can change the implementation work that it needs to be done to try to automate that more. And that needs to be a priority of your company, because you can't function and scale if you've got to be, you know, very high touch during that phase of the customer's life cycle. I hope that answers your question, Frederick.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen. It's 1:56, so I think we might want to wrap up now. There are a few questions we didn't answer, but I think, do you have a slide with all of your contact information and a little bit more about you?
Yes. So 2 things I want to mention. We are running 2 customer success training programs. One is a program for leaders. So this is the customer success leadership program. We have a series that's going to run through the end of the year that starts next week. So if you're interested in that, please sign up now. That one's getting a little bit full. So I want to make sure that anyone who's taken this, who's sat in on this webinar, who might be interested in a little bit deeper training, if you're interested in the training program, get on it now. There's also a CSM training program. This is more for frontline CSMs, and that one starts next week too. Both of these have 2 weeks off around the Thanksgiving holidays, so don't worry if you're planning to take time off or visit your family then. There won't be classes, so you don't have to worry about there being a conflict, and then we'll wrap up in mid-December. So these are each online training programs. They're instructor-led. They're 60 minutes long per week over an 8-week period, and they each come with a tool that you can use right away to improve how you're working with your customers, or improve, in the case of the leadership program, improve how you're planning out your team. And these are all tools that I've used with my own teams and are very effective at improving your customer success program overall. So I hope I'll see many of you in those programs. You can check that out on our website. We also have a free weekly newsletter. You can sign up for that by visiting our website, thesuccessleague.io, and visiting our blog page. There's a little sign-up form there. And if you are interested in some help on any of these topics, we are a consulting firm. We also offer coaching services for customer success leaders. So if you're interested in any of that, please reach out to me directly, and you'll get my contact information as a part of this presentation. But I think I'm also listed, Mathilde, on your website as well.
Yeah, definitely. You're listed under the expert center. So
perfect.
Awesome.
And thank you so much, everybody, for attending the webinar today. I really appreciate your time, and I hope this was helpful for all of you. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you, and thanks, Mathilde.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That was awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. And yeah, we'll see you soon for another webinar. You'll get the recording, and I would definitely encourage reaching out to Kristen and subscribing to her blog, because it's awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Kristen. Have an awesome day.
Bye.